wasn't sure if my laptop computer was going to work okay. So that's why I asked you about the phone, because I thought the phone would work, and it's a much easier way to do it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That sounds great. Yeah, I've done it
Yeah.
that way before. Skype works well for me because it I have a little downloaded recorder, that
Mm-hmm.
attaches to it, and so then it makes it really simple to just make the audio file, and then I can go back. I put that into GarageBand. It's just a little thing on the
Yeah.
Mac, and then listen to it and edit a little bit, and then slot it in between the intro and outro pieces,
Mm-hmm.
and it's done. So it's really a simple way to do to do these podcasts. So yeah, fantastic.
Great. Great.
And I saw your name is, I think it's Cornelia.Gamlem. Um, you know,
Yeah,
uh,
okay. Is that how it's coming up? Okay. I
yeah.
wasn't sure because I was a little rattled the day that I set it up, and I kept going, I hope that's what it is. I hope that's what it is. So that's good to know. I will make note of that.
so so we can start. I'll just sort of give a brief introduction, and then we can start in. Thanks so much for sharing your books, and especially the management book. That I guess we'll make that the centerpiece of what we talk about. That's what you wanted to do, right? And
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely.
it's great. I've made a bunch of notes out of the book, and boy, it's very thorough, and it's a great research book. Sort of a reference book for people to have, as well as just to go through the first time to get up to speed on all the different topics. It's really thorough. So I'm looking forward to. I guess I'll just sort of. What I'll do is just ask you a little bit about your background and things, and then we'll get right into the book and go through the book in any way you want. I'll just sort of, take your lead, and then I have some of the different points. If there's a lull or something, we can sort of, move to those points and stuff, from your book.
Okay,
Sound
great.
good?
Sounds good.
And we'll
Sounds
just,
perfect.
yeah, we'll just have fun with it.
Good.
Oh, okay, so I'll just start. Um, Well, welcome, and I'm very excited today to talk to Cornelia Gamlem about her book and her career, but particularly about her book, The Manager's Answer Book. And she wrote it in with a co-author, Barbara Mitchell, and she's also written The Big Book of HR. And the book is absolutely fantastic. The Manager's Answer Book, Powerful Tools to Build Trust in Teams, Maximize Your Impact and Influence, and Respond to Challenges. And so, Cornelia, welcome.
Well, hi, I'm delighted to be here, John.
Oh, super. I've been really looking forward to this for a long time, and it's great to finally get together and talk about management issues. And it seems like you've had a long and seasoned career in HR and other things. And I'd like maybe we can just start out with a little bit of your background and how you came to be so thoroughly knowledgeable about all the aspects of management.
Okay, well, it probably started back when I returned to school to finish my degree, and I got a degree in management, and that path led me into human resources. I knew somebody that was working in a manufacturing company, and he introduced me to some folks, and I started my career working in HR during that period of time, and ended up having quite an exciting career working with people and working with people-related issues in human resources. I worked for a Fortune 500 company in the corporate office for about 16 years, doing a lot around employee relations. So as you can imagine, I had a lot of interaction with managers during that period of time, and got to deal with a lot of different interesting issues, not just around human resources, but as they kind of connected with other areas of management. Because my feeling always is, if you're going to be effective in human resources, you have to understand what the management team is dealing with, and you have to understand a little bit about how they operate and what their issues are, and what the different functional areas are in an organization. So that gave me, I felt, a good grounding, not just in human resources, but in business itself. And I had the chance to serve on a lot of corporate task forces that were cross-functional teams. So it was really just a way to, take everything I had learned in school academically and look at it from an operational standpoint. Then, after a good run in the corporate world, I decided it was time for something different, and I went out on my own and started my own consulting practice in 2000. And of course, there you get to bring everything you know about management into play, because now you're managing. You've got a practice to management. And even though I was a solo practitioner, there's still a lot of things, that you need to know to be effective. I needed to be able to talk to technology people if I was having technology issues or purchasing new equipment. Needed to understand about finance and accounting, so that at the end of the year, when I turned everything over to my accountant, he understood everything that I was giving to him. So I just really found that all of that gave me some really good grounding in it. And got to work with a lot of other organizations and learn about a lot of different industries. So all of that was great, and that kind of led to the path to morphing into being an author, as well as as a business partner to a lot of these organizations.
Well, fantastic. Yeah, I can understand as you start to gain all this knowledge, then, and as you mentor other people, then distilling it into a written form makes ultimate sense. I've taken a similar path, and it's really interesting to compare notes on that, coming out of the corporate world and then being your own, solo practitioner and consulting and things. It's a much different world, right? Suddenly all of the challenges fall on your shoulders, and like you say, then you have to manage. And I think HR is probably, and human resource management, an excellent place to start any kind of understanding of management, because it's really the core function.
It is, and I'm so glad to hear you say that, because especially if you're in a service industry, like so many of the businesses in the country today are, the people really are the heart of that industry. So you've got to understand how to manage the people, because they're as an important resource, if not the most important resource, as as all of your capital investments, and your financial resources that you have in the organization. So it is good that people are understanding the value of treating your workforce in a way that they're going to be engaged, that they're going to be productive, because if they're not, they're just wasting their time, and they're wasting your time, and they're wasting other resources within the organization. They're having an impact on their other team members and on the management team as well. And if they're not happy campers, they are not going to be producing for you, and it's really going to have a trickle down effect.
Right. The and your book, I like the way you've couched your book and formatted it as Q&A. It's super well organized in about 6 or 7 different chapters that really go through all the different aspects in an organic way. I think as you develop as a manager, here are the most important things as you go along. And also within that, each chapter has a number of questions and then the answer. And that Q&A format is really nice. It's conversational.
That's what we were going for. When the idea was first proposed to us, we thought we can really have a lot of fun with this in writing it. Because, first of all, between the two of us, we have a lot of years of experience. So we've both touched a lot of different areas within an organization and have gotten to learn a lot about it. But we started to kind of roll back ourselves and say, okay, when we were first managers and we were first trying to understand how organizations operated, and whether it's a large organization or a small organization, there are still some of those basics that are going to be in place, and basic things that you need to know. So we kind of started from there and said, as a new manager, what is it that nobody's ever quite taught you, or you may have studied it in school, but now you've got to put all of that into practice. And how do we get there? How do we get there in a very practical way? So that was our approach to both formulating some of the question. If I, going back and remembering when I was a new manager, what is it that I wanted to know? And then how do I go about drawing on my experience to, to give the readers the benefit of our collective advice and experience?
Yeah, great. And the book works two ways, I think. One is to as an onboarding or preparatory type of thing for new managers, where they can go through and read the book from beginning to end, and then really have a firm grasp on all the different aspects, and also know other directions to take deeper dives and to understand things better. But it gives a really great big picture view of how to do this, and a lot of detail and depth as well. But it's not overbearing. It's quick enough that you can get through it and then start, hit the ground running. And then it also, I think, works as a reference book where as people have issues come up or whatever and they want a little bit more advice, they can go and turn to the book and find that particular spot and then get some good cogent advice about how to approach particular issues when they come up. And it's all actionable advice, I like, too.
Great. Yeah, that's what we were going for, something that was really hands-on for the reader.
Yeah, and so I'd like to talk about some of the different aspects in some detail so we can give the listeners some real feel for it, and hopefully they can take away some things that they can start using right away even. I like that you start with, one of the first things you start with is, it's all about skills development, but with financial literacy and really having a sound grasp of the numbers side of the business, understanding how to read the financial statements, a balance sheet, income statement, and a cash flow statement, and then how to start thinking about budgeting and those kind of things. Because at the end of the day, that's how a business is measured, and that's the scorecard, is the money in and the money out, and how much you actually get to retain. And that's the way that, at the end of the day, it's the bottom line performance. So I thought that was a really good place to start.
Yeah, I mean, so did we. In fact, we had sat down with a good friend and colleague of ours when we were first beginning to develop the idea around the book and how we wanted it organized. And he had experience as a CFO with a lot of the staff functions reporting into him. And it was funny because we asked him, all right, what is it that you would want your new managers to know? And as he was ticking off some of these things, we were just shaking our heads going, yeah, we were going to cover that. Yeah, we were going to cover that. So it was very, it was encouraging to us to know that we were really on the right track. But, one of the things that I realized, I had said earlier, I got my undergraduate degree in business. So I had that academic exposure to a lot of this, as well as, some practical exposure, like particularly to accounting and financing in some of the positions I had along the way. But I thought, how many times have I spoken to even new managers or other HR professionals, and they didn't know an income statement from a balance sheet, and if you started talking about budgeting, they didn't even know where to begin. And I thought, gee, I was so fortunate to have had some of that grounding, even if it was just through a course of study, but I knew where to go back and find some of that information, but so many folks don't, and we've got, fortunately, the issue in this country, we take some of our best performers, and regardless of what industry you're in, but I'll just look at engineering, for example. You're a great engineer, let's make you a manager, and you never give people any background in how to be a manager, and some of those managerial issues that got to deal with, or the business issues. I also remember talking to a friend many years ago. Her husband was a veterinarian, and he, joined this practice, became a partner, and she said he was always lamenting, I don't know anything about running a business. I'm a good veterinarian, but they don't teach you this in vet school. And so there's really a need for people to understand some of those basics, because otherwise it's do I have that shoebox, the proverbial shoebox full of receipts at the end of the year that I deliver to my accountant and expect him to know it, and I don't even know where my money's going. And of course, if you're part of an organization, you've got to be accountable for financially for for how you're running that department. You can't just start going out and buying equipment or giving out raises to people if you don't know, the confines of the financial budget that you've got to deal with.
Right, exactly. That makes great sense. And I found I've had the same kind of experience. I mean, a lot of people, they are good performers in their whatever it is, like you say, technical expertise. You're an engineer or whatever, and then so suddenly you're going to be moved up to take on more responsibility, and you haven't been taught any of these things. And I think people are, especially about the financial part, they're intimidated because it seems sort of highly technical, and there's all these buzzwords around it, and so they kind of sort of try to fake their way through instead of really getting just a simple, firm, solid grounding in that. I think that's one of probably the biggest issues of when people get Peter principled into a role that they get up so high that they're finally incompetent. It's not really that they're incompetent, but they just don't have those basic business skill sets that would help them to perform so much better. They have all the common sense knowledge. All they need to know is get over those intimidation humps of what the buzzwords are and get a big picture view. And then it can become relatively easy to manage because you know what you're talking about. And the number side of the business, you got all this, like you say, the CFO, and then the controller, and then the accountants, and all that kind of thing. And it seems like this whole side of business that's siloed off and doesn't really talk to the other people because they're talking a different language. And to get over those communication barriers, I think, are really super important to have that kind of cross-functional performance in a big organization. And if you're going to be a solopreneur or a small company like the veterinarian, then you really do have to have that side of it. There's so many people, there's horror stories about, famous musicians or something, and 10 years later they wonder where all the money went because their accountant or their manager absconded with it all because they never looked at what was coming in, what was going out, and making sure that it was done in a controlled, managed way. And we all do this. We all understand. Basically, we all run an enterprise, right? We get our paycheck. We have our checkbook. We have our expenses. We know that at the end of the month we better not be spending more than we make, and all those kind of things. It's basically just taking those and applying them across in a business setting with a more formalized language.
Absolutely, and you just hit on something a minute ago when you were talking about, understanding, or everybody talks their own language. It was one of the reasons we put that one chapter in called Managing Up, Down, and Around. And, it's really managing across the organization, because what we wanted people to be able to read about and to, again, get that basic understanding of, these are some of the other functions that likely exist in your organization. And you need to understand, some of the buzzwords around that. You need to understand how they operate and what their priorities are. In fact, we had talked a lot with our friend about IT, because he had IT reporting into him. And, he said, so many times, and this has happened to all of us, I'm having a meltdown, there's something wrong with my computer. Why do you have to make up a ticket? Why can't you just send somebody over here right now? I need you now. And, he said they don't understand. First of all, it's about accountability. Everybody's got their metrics that they've got to measure their own performance on. So, did we open a ticket for this? How long was it open? How quickly did we resolve something?
Right.
Or the the IT staff may not be available right here and now when you need them, because the CEO has a priority that they're working on, and you're going to have to fall in line, behind a more pressing priority. And often people don't understand that. And if you're a manager and one of your team members comes to you, all in a tizzy about something, you've got to be able to both manage your team member, but be able to talk with IT in a way that you understand what some of their pressing needs are, and try to make sure that you can resolve this for everybody, and be sensitive to all of the other resources that exist in the organization. And I think that's something that people often, again, when you get into that siloed mentality, you understand your own resources, but you don't understand the resources that exist out there in all of the other departments within your organization. And so we wanted to be able to bring that home to the readers, to say, hey, you're part of something bigger than just your department. So you need to get an understanding of what the rest of the organization does, so that you can help your team understand that as well.
Those are great points, and that's I really like that chapter, because a lot of times when we initially think of managing, we think of managing down, that we're coming up with some kind of plan and saying do this, do that, and then watching what happens, and really managing laterally, like you say, across the different other disciplines in an organization, the functional areas, and then also. A lot of people right off the bat, I think, don't think about how do you manage up? How do you communicate up the chain and manage in a way that you manage expectations and don't take on too many roles or whatever, so that you set yourself up for failure, and that you communicate those up the ladder to your bosses and things, so they understand, and that's actually a function of management and a skill set in and of itself, managing up.
Absolutely, and when you talk about expectations, I mean that you hit on something that both my co-author Barbara and I think are so important. You've got to you start a relationship with anybody by setting some of those expectations. We talk a lot about it when you're managing people, and let people know from the very beginning. From the time you interview a candidate, what the expectations are for the interview process, and then for the job that they're going to be coming into. And you've got, as a manager, you've got to keep reiterating those expectations to your staff. But it works the same way whether you're managing up or you're managing across and as you said, laterally throughout the organization. You've got to develop those relationships with people. But then you do have to set those expectations. If you're dealing with your boss and the CEO, you've got to let them know what you can reasonably accomplish. And you've got to talk about expectations as a two-way street. They've got to let you know what they expect of you, you as an individual and you as a department to produce. But you've also got to let them know everything that's going on, because as we all know, the larger the organization is, if you've ever worked in a large company, the higher up you go, the folks up there in the C-suite start to lose track of what may be going on down at the business unit level in the organization.
Right.
So those expectations are so important. But it's also, as you get to know your peers and your colleagues within the organization. And I think this becomes particularly important for service industries, as our friend was telling us. People just think you're there. Finance is there to serve me. HR is here to serve me, but they've got to understand, kind of the boundaries and the parameters that each of these different service functions have to operate under. And so that's all part of setting your expectations. And as a manager, you've got a lot of responsibilities to do that, because it's going up, down, and around and through the entire organization. But the better job that you do about that's such a great way to develop the relationships throughout your organization, and also to build trust. Because if you're honest
Right.
with somebody and say, we can't do this, or we can't do this week because we've got these other pressing priorities, or something else has to happen before we can take that on, but then you end up delivering that, then people know throughout the organization that they can count on you, and that A, you're going to give them an honest answer, but B, they can take your word for something. And if you say you can do something, then they trust that you'll be able to do it.
Right. When you do when you do what you say you're going to do, and that a lot of those issues come up in, like you said, building that trust and that showing integrity and acting with integrity come up. I liked your chapter on building your personal brand and having all those aspects of how you conduct yourself, how you act, that then people in your organization can come to rely on you, trust you, and know that you're going to talk straight with them.
Absolutely. And, and I think that's something, when we talk about your own brand, regardless of the size of the organization that you work in, and when I found this, moving from a large organization to going off on my own, one of the things that made me successful inside, and somebody told me this before I was leaving, a colleague who had done consulting in the past, but it's all about the credibility that you take, and and when I recognized that and started working then with different companies, and as you walk into an organization, they don't know you, and I kept thinking, boy, it was just like when I took on this role in corporate and suddenly had all of this exposure to people. I had to build my own credibility. I couldn't ride on my boss's coattails. I had to let people know that I was credible too. Right. And also live up to the expectations that that we had at the corporate level. But I think a lot of times people kind of lose sight of that if they're in a smaller organization. But I think it's so much more important, because the smaller your organization, the more you're going to be interacting, I think, with people outside of the organization, because you're going to be more dependent on, external resources, for example. And if you don't have a good, credible presence in your community, in your outside the organization, in your professional community and among some of your professional peers, you're not going to be effective in getting a lot of things done. People just aren't going to take you seriously. So that credibility, and it is so far and wide, and I think we tried to bring that out in the book. It starts with, yes, how do you present yourself, your personal appearance? But it goes well beyond that. It goes to, can I back up the things that I say? Right. Am I good at listening to people and really understanding what people are trying to communicate to me? And can I communicate back to them in a way that is credible, and not just, kind of talking in sound bites and throwing a lot of stuff out there, but not really giving a lot of good information to people. So yes, credibility is just so. To me, it's kind of the the cornerstone of any good manager's success, and out of credibility grows trust and integrity, and just all of those fine characteristics that you need, and it doesn't matter the size of the organization you're in.
Well, right, and I think it all comes from just being your genuine self and being honest and living up to what you say you're going to do and actually doing it. You hit on a lot of great points there, and one of the points I had, and you've started talking about it, is communication skills and how important those are. And a lot of times when we focus on communication skills, they're very important, but we think about written and public speaking and the email communications, but listening, I think, is something that has gotten a lot more attention lately, but it's been relatively overlooked as the most important part, that we have to understand what the other side is trying to say and where they're coming from and what their issues are.
Listening is one of those things, my co-author likes to say, it sounds so easy, but it's one of the hardest things to do. Right. And we don't teach people how to listen. And if you really think about some of the coursework you may have taken, if you've gone through any kind of a business program, whether it's a formal MBA program or just informal training that you've taken, you'll take a writing class, you'll take a presentation class and a public speaking class, but nobody teaches you how to listen, and it is the key to communication. And in fact, in one of our earlier books on workplace conflict, we have a chapter entitled "Listen Up," and we talk about the importance of listening a lot more in that book, but we tried to bring some of that into the Manager's Answer book, because people don't don't spend the time. And I've often said I'm fascinated when I watch people in meetings. You can tell who's really listening and who's just sitting there shaking their head going, or waiting, waiting for their turn to talk, but not really absorbing what's going on around them. And, to me, a big part of listening, too, is reading people's body language if you're in a face-to-face conversation with them or in a meeting setting. Because that's where you see the people who are just on the edge of their seat ready to say something versus, people you may observe who are sitting back and taking notes, but it's because they're formulating, what a good response might be, but they're really listening to what the speaker has to say. So I think that is it's a skill that all of us can continue to work on, especially in our business life. It's something that you never stop perfecting.
Right. I think it's super important also in our personal lives. I like what you said. There's this old adage that I've heard, that we have one mouth and two ears, and we should use them in that kind of proportion. And we tend not to. And it was a very good point you made about that we take courses in public speaking and in written communications and all this, but we don't there should be an active listening, course so that it's actually focused on, because it is so critically important for us to know. And so that and part of communication and part of listening, I think that a subset of maybe communication is negotiations, and you talk a lot about negotiations in the book, and I like the setup that you use about separating the people from the problem and focusing on interests and those kind of things that came out of that like the Getting to Yes book and Bill Urey's work and stuff. I'm really a big fan of that, and so you really have to sit back and understand what the other side wants, so that you don't get into some negotiation where you're just, having whatever the problem seems to be, but really finding out what all the multi-dimensions are, and then how can you negotiate a wise outcome. So and in an organization, everything is to a degree a negotiation. You're trying to understand and tell people what they should do, and here's why they should do it, and they come back and you make this kind of negotiated agreement. Same thing managing up. There's a lot of negotiations that way. And laterally, trying to get people, across an organization to do things for you, or you're going to do things for them. How do you actually negotiate that landscape? And like you said, too, outside of an organization, all the vendors and suppliers and people, the smaller your organization, the more you rely on those people. You don't have real hierarchical authority power over them, so you can't really tell them do this, do that. You have to negotiate some sort of a solution to get things done in any type of meaningful way. And if you don't negotiate it, then people tend to maybe feel left out, or they'll get passive aggressive, or they'll do a half-baked job, and you run the risk of not getting the best out of people if they don't feel like they've actually had a say, a negotiated solution say in what they're doing and why.
One of the ways I like to think about negotiation, and not just in the business world, but in your personal life as well. But it's really about problem solving, and I don't necessarily mean problem from a negative connotation, but let's take an example of dealing with a vendor. In an organization, you have a need for some product or service, and that's your problem, if you will. Or that's a void that you're trying to fill. So you go through a process of finding the best solution to it. And, you may identify, a service provider to help you. But then, yes, you've got to negotiate some of the terms of the agreement that you're going to put in place, and that's going to guide the relationship. So that's one part of, or one way that negotiation is so important to an organization. But then, as we all know, issues come up, and I think managers particularly find themselves in the middle of this. There may be a squabble between two of their employees, and they're trying to draw the manager into it to help them. And as a manager, then you really have to put on not so much negotiation skills, but facilitation skills. You have to understand the basics of negotiation, but then you have to go into that discussion with these two employees and facilitate their discussions and kind of teach them what good negotiations is. They're the ones that have to come up with the solution to their problem. You really don't want to be in a situation that you impose it on them.
Right.
And I think a lot of times managers don't realize that, again, especially if you're a new manager. They want to go in and just say, okay, look, this is what's going to happen. You're going to do this and you're going to do that.
Right.
And that's not always the best way to handle that particular problem. And if you stop and think about that, if you went to a potential vendor and said, this is the way you have to do this for us, and the vendor knows that that's not a practical solution for a number of different reasons, it gets back to listening skills. You've got to be able to listen to what the other party has to say. And if you're open to that, and I think this is how all of these skills build on each other. You've got to be a good listener so that when you're sitting down in a discussion with somebody, whether it's a little bit antagonistic or you're just trying to solve a problem and come up with a good solution, you want to understand what they're telling you, because they may have a much better solution to a problem than you think you have. So it all kind of comes together, but people, I think, don't have a clear understanding of what negotiation is. It's not. It's like I like to say out here. It's not horse trading.
Right.
It's finding a solution that's going to work for everybody, not just for one side or the other.
Right, exactly, and that's so important. That hard style of I have to win, and what I win, you lose. That kind of zero sum kind of thing doesn't work. And if you're going to be dictatorial and say this is the way it's going to be, say with a vendor or something, maybe they'll finally say okay and just go down that path, knowing that it's going to be a disaster, and you set yourself up for failure because you didn't listen. And I think, like I say, too, conflict resolution skills, where you're facilitating and letting people work it out and letting the problem or whatever the conflict is or the discrepancy have time to breathe so that people can come to their own solution, instead of saying, I think, managers that are newly minted managers want the problem to go away right away. So they're just going to say, you do this is what's going to happen, and let's get rid of this problem. And then it turns out that just festers then and isn't really resolved.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's what we kind of hope a lot of managers will take away from, from reading the book is that there are an awful lot of skills that they've got to work on. And if an organization's smart, they're going to invest in some skill development for their managers or people that they hope to promote into management positions. They'll have some kind of leadership development or training processes in place, whether it's internal or external, so that people really do begin to understand. When I step into this new role, and oh wow, you put that badge on me now that says I'm a manager. What does it really mean? Because a lot of people, aren't really prepared for it as they take on these new responsibilities.
Absolutely, and then you can feel supported by your organization. The organization knows that they're training people so that they'll succeed in those roles. And another couple of things you talk about relative to those kind of training mechanisms is, one, mentoring, and I think that's a big part, is finding mentors within an organization or outside an organization that can give you wise advice and that have been there, done that, and can help you see what's maybe around the corner there or something, and what you should be looking at.
Yeah, I think mentoring is so important, and a lot of times people think about having formal mentoring programs with all different parameters around it and rules and guidelines and everything. And again, that's great if you've got the resources to put something like that in play. But, a good mentor is somebody who will see someone that has got a lot of potential but needs some guidance, and is willing to, sit down and talk with that person and kind of give them the best advice that they have, and help them as they kind of move along and grow in the organization. Then, of course, a lot of things that we've been seeing too is we always think of mentoring as, coming from a top-down approach where it's always somebody who, who's been with the organization a long time, that somebody that has a lot of sage advice to provide. But we're seeing a lot of, what they call reverse mentoring,
right,
in today's workplaces, especially around technology issues that older workers are struggling with some of this stuff. And, you've got the 24-year-old who's sitting next to you who was born practically with a laptop or an iPhone in their hand. And,
right.
it just comes, it's second nature to them. And there's so much that can be learned from both, from both sides of the equation, if you will. And to me, I think, a lot of the reverse mentoring did start around technology issues. But if you take the time to listen to the younger generation, they're bringing a lot of good ideas into today's workplace. And I think that, it can be so beneficial to have those kinds of relationships and almost have a two-way mentoring going on, because yes, there's a lot of things that they can learn from their older colleagues, but they've also got some great ideas that if they're working with some of their older colleagues, they may have a little bit more savvy on how can we get some of these new ideas implemented and actually get them executed within the organization. So yeah, I think mentoring is just a great way to bring people together. And like you say, inside or even outside the organization, within different professional groups too. It's great to be able to learn from each other, and see how different generations have kind of evolved to where they are today in their thinking and their ways of doing things, and then how can we change it?
Yeah, I like, that's such a great idea, reverse mentoring and that two-way kind of street. And that's sort of an aspect of diversity, just age diversity and experience diversity. And a lot of these topics in your book are timeless. I mean, communication skills, listening, managing type of things, trust and integrity. These are all things that they're timeless. They don't change. But with how much technology has changed so rapidly, and not just affecting the IT department and things, even big parts of an organization, marketing has changed dramatically since we have all these online tools and these growth hacking and going viral with different marketing techniques. There's really not, in those kind of areas, legacy expertise really doesn't exist because the tool sets have changed. A lot of the stuff's just not even a decade old. And so we have to do reverse mentoring in those kind of areas where legacy knowledge may actually be a hindrance and not a help, because the tool sets have changed so fast and the thinking has changed so quickly that we have to take that type of reverse mentoring approach. I also liked you talked in the mentoring section about encouraging lifelong learning, and I think that's such a key. That this is not something that it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. It is a lifelong type of practice, and there's all these great resources now, like podcasts and the online courses and audiobooks and TED Talks that you talk about, and just even reading, and how we can accelerate our experience by reading other people's experiences and then assimilating that into our own instead of just relying on our own experiences. That's sort of a slow path, and there's all these other tools to more rapidly gain experience.
Yeah, and I think that ties into, as we were talking about, the changes in technology. If anybody thinks that they know everything now, because you've been in the workplace for umpty million years, that's crazy, because things are changing so much, and it's exciting. It's just a way to gain more knowledge and really stay on top of your game. Barbara and I often talk about when we went in, started on this journey of becoming authors, and suddenly found ourselves learning a whole lot more about the publishing industry, which neither of us knew a whole lot about, never worked in the industry. And, Now, if you're going to be successful as an author, you've got to understand what's going on. And of course, that's an industry that's changing like any other, just so dramatically because of technology. But when we've addressed business groups, we've talked about that, and our own experience with saying, whoa, we used to go to a lot of HR conferences, and yes, we still continue to learn stuff in our own area of expertise. But all of a sudden, we find ourselves at a writers' conference, and we're learning a lot of things about a whole new industry that we've now found ourselves parachuted down in the middle of. And it's exciting because it's like, oh wow, these are new things to learn, and you're meeting a very diverse group of people when you go to these, and if the people that I heard somebody say once that she wouldn't want to live to be 100 because you just get to a point where, well, you've learned everything that you need to know. And I just sat there shaking my head, and I said, well, you may know everything you need to know, like to get by on a day-by-day basis, but what about the things you want to know?
Right, exactly.
I don't think I'll live long enough to learn everything that I want to know. So, yeah, committing yourself to being a lifelong learner, I mean, it's not just that it's an imperative to be successful. It's just an exciting way to live, and, way to gain new information and new knowledge and meet new people. So, we hope that a lot of managers who read the book will see that that's a personal commitment that they should make for not just their own professional development, but for their personal development as well.
Absolutely, and I'm so 100% with you on that. And it's really keeping up that engaged, curious attitude as you face the world, and to look at things and say, wow, yeah, here's another thing that I can learn, here's another thing to take in, and just be voracious in your curiosity and explore all kinds of things, because they all tend to fit together and give us more knowledge that we can draw upon as we come upon situations in management. Another key point I think that you talk about in the book, that a key aspect to develop and to be aware of is critical thinking and critical thinking skills, especially in this day, not even just in your job, but looking at the world and all of these different news sources and where information is coming from, and is it credible, is it reliable, all those kind of things. I think critical thinking is such a super important skill set to cultivate and be aware of as we go forward.
It really is, and I often say we live in this world of sound bites, and I always used to caution my clients about that something would come, a new regulation would come out that would impact their business, and they would say, well, I read that, and they read this 4-paragraph something that wasn't necessarily wrong per se, but it didn't go deep enough, and it didn't give them enough information that I felt they needed to have so that they could really implement this regulation in a way that was positive for their organization. And, I also heard somebody speak at a conference I went to, and he was talking about, a lot of blogs that he had been reading, on a certain subject that had, again, it was something that had just come out, and he said half of the information was wrong in half of the blogs that he was reading. Right. And I always used to try to bring folks back to, here's the source. Pick up the regulations. No, you may not want to read all 14 pages of them, but scan through them. So if you've got a question, rather than scanning the internet, and I had somebody say that to me one time. Well, I was looking online and I did a Google search, and this is what I came up with. And they were all off the mark. And I said to her, let me bring you back to what I first sent you, and I can point you to that section of the regulations, and that's going to answer your question. And you should have picked up the phone and called me first. You wouldn't have wasted all of this time, looking online needlessly. So, the ability to be able to parse a lot of the information that comes across your desk, and to stop and think and say, is this credible? Where did it come from? And I think we all get, on our phones and everything, the stream coming across. And, the first thing I'll do is I'll say, oh, okay, that came from the New York Times. That's a credible news source,
Right.
and understanding that that's where I want to go to read that particular article, or this law was passed and this, the secretary of whatever agency made this comment about it. Okay, I'll take that as a little bit more credible because they're charged with, implementing those particular laws.
Right.
Versus just, somebody out there putting something out there without enough background information to really give you that true understanding of it. And I think too often people don't stop to really determine if the information that's presented to them is credible. They don't want to ever question it. And that there's a big opportunity lost there. So, bringing it back to a manager, just because you hear things, don't take everything on face value. Sometimes you've got to be a little bit of an investigator, but you've got to kind of get to the root of that information, or the root cause of a problem.
Right. Agreed. That very well put. Yeah, I mean, nowadays there's so much information that can come out on all kinds of different issues, and we don't have the traditional gatekeepers, which is maybe beneficial on some sides. We don't have just editors, or you have all these other things in between when you say something or write something and somebody can read it. Now it can be quickly put out as a blog or a tweet or whatever kind of social media message, and there's no intermediaries that are sort of playing that critical thinking gatekeeping role for us anymore. So I think the personal responsibility is a lot more now, and something for us really to keep aware of. Let's see, there another area that you talk about that I think is really key for managers as far as setting up projects, measuring them, how long they're going to be to completion, is project management skills and understanding the basics of timelines and critical paths and Gantt charts and PERT charts and all those kind of tools that actually help you set the goals, and then, okay, how are we going to achieve those goals, and how are we going to measure if we're going in the right direction, and how we're utilizing our resources and all those kind of things.
Yeah, I think that, that's again, something that a lot of new managers, particularly if they've never been exposed to that, are totally blown away by. We're given this project for our department, and I'm just going to go tell everybody what they need to do, and I'll let you know when it's done. And do you have a way to measure whether or not you've brought that project in on time and on budget? Do you understand everything that needs to take place to get to that point? What tasks need to be done first before you can go on to the next set of tasks? How much time are we associating? Is there a hard deadline at the end? Now, I remember I had a couple of experiences doing mergers and acquisitions when I was in my corporate role, and I remember somebody sitting next to me in a meeting, because they had a project timeline up there, and of course, the big deadline was this is cutover date. Everything needed to be done by that date, and she kept going, I don't understand what all these boxes are, and I was trying, just show her that, we had to be at this point, that this is the end of the line. So we had to gauge what needed to get done by when,
right?
From where we are now, and I started to explain it to her as like, it's like a railroad, and you stop at each station, and you have to have so much accomplished by the time you get to that station. And it was finally, the light bulb went on for her. But so, particularly if you're, well, I shouldn't even say if you're just in a services industry, because the same holds true in manufacturing. You've got manufacturing schedules and deadlines as well. But if you're not prepared for that and just don't understand the language around it, you can be doomed for failure. And in today's organizations, a lot of times you may end up finding yourself managing, some kind of a cross-functional team. And you've got folks on this team that you don't have direct managerial responsibility for, but you've got to use some influence with them. So that's why having a good, solid plan, and regardless of what project management tool you're using, you still need to have a good plan that can take you from point A to point B. And that plan needs to make sense for the scope of the project, too. I was talking to a business owner recently, and she was saying, they work on projects of all sizes. And her staff tries to, they've got a very good process if they're working on large-scale projects, but they try to impose that same process on some of the smaller scale processes. And I said to her, no, that's not going to work, having had a look into that organization. I said they need to and they can scale back on some of what they're doing, especially in year 2 of the project. And she said, yeah, that's what I thought, but I wanted a reality check. And I said, it's all very scalable, but it's, you just don't do it one way. You have variations of your plan so that it can work for the projects that you're working on.
Excellent points. Yes, right sizing the project management oversight and all. We talked about, and from project management, I think this flows into the operations and getting into the nitty gritty of manufacturing and all the different parts of what the business is actually doing. Inventory, all those kind of things. We talked about financial literacy. And you also talk about in the book, and I think it's great, business literacy and really being aware of the various aspects of operations.
Absolutely. And I think I said earlier, I was always sensitive to that with, my business education. But when I first got into HR working as a recruiter, I had to understand what I was recruiting for when I was working with the different managers. And I personally always found that very valuable. But for a manager who's got to work, across the organization, you've got to have that understanding of, kind of what are your colleagues' pain points, if you will, in their organization. What are the things that or in their department? What are the things that are critical to them? Because you may not have thought about that. You're working with accounting, for example, and they want to see certain measurements, and they want to make sure that people aren't running over budget because there's only, a certain amount of money that's there. And they're not just looking at that from their department, they're looking at it from everybody's department. I used to have that argument so many times around merit increases with managers, or discussions, shall we say, because I kept saying, you can't keep pushing the salary budget for your department up because we've got one salary budget for the entire corporation. So if it's set at X percent, if you're pushing it up to X plus 3%, somebody else is losing. And getting that understanding of you're a piece of it. I want to buy equipment. Why can't I go out and, go to the big box store and get equipment there? Well, because you may think it's cheaper, but you don't know the kinds of contracts that that the procurement and purchasing departments have negotiated with their suppliers. And, and a lot of times, once you buy X amount, you're going to start to see a rebate back. So it really may be cheaper, and that's what you're going to be charged against in your budget is that final cost. And then, add on top of that, they've probably negotiated certain warranties and service agreements on a lot of the equipment. So recognizing that and recognizing if you want to go out and sort of be a renegade in some of these areas, you're impacting more than just your own department. You're having an impact on other departments in the organization. And that's just such a critical piece to understand, I think, as a manager. You're part of the whole, and the whole has to work together as one, one big unit.
Oh, excellent point. And that leads into, the thinking of the big picture, the whole picture, and how the whole organization operates. And strategic planning and strategic thinking, you talk about that in the book and the difference between the two, and actually coming up with not just a project management for an individual project, for where does the organization want to go and how are we going to get there and how are we going to implement those strategic initiatives as we go forward.
Yeah, I mean, I've sat in on quite a number of strategic planning sessions throughout my career, in a volunteer role as a consultant, as well as being in a large organization. And, the first thing you always have to keep in mind is once the plan has been set at the highest, the highest level of the organization, everything has to flow from that. So you can't, whatever you set as a strategic plan in manufacturing, in operations, in human resources, it has to be in alignment with what the overall strategic plan is for the organization. If the organization says we want to increase our reach by 20% this year. So, for sales, that means, what kind of an increase in sales do we need to have? For HR, it means, what kind of an increase in talent acquisition do we need to have? Where are we going to find the people? Finance is going to be making sure, are we going to have this inflow so we have the money in reserves to support perhaps some of the new talent that's going to come in, that's going to develop some new initiatives. So it's all of these pieces have to come together, and you've got to realize where the organization is going before you can even sit down and do your own strategic planning at the business unit or the department level. I think, and the same thing goes for trying to figure out, what our mission is as a department. I've gone through that exercise with clients, and it's like they're all in there. They've got these ideas, and the first thing I say is, let's look at what your organization's mission is, and then how do you support that mission? And it's kind of like, oh, that's going to make it a lot easier when they realize that's what they're tasked to do.
Right, that they have some guidance from the mission and the strategic plan, and how does it fit in with that? I remember from Herb Kelleher and Southwest Airlines, they had their mission, and I remember one thing was somebody came up and said we really should be serving meals on the plane because that'll help us compete with the other airlines. And he said, well, does that fit with our strategic plan and mission to be the low cost airline? Well, no. Well, then that is that's out. We're not going to do that. So having those criteria that then you can make every decision making has to take that into account, those strategic criteria. The other side of this, we're talking about management and in organizations, and there's been so much great work lately about entrepreneurial thinking and entrepreneurial skill sets, and you talk about that. Good managers also have to have these sort of entrepreneurial mindsets so that they can think in a visionary way and creative way, and so they can come up with new ideas and then how to test those new ideas and implement them, because no organization is static. If it is, it's going to start to decline pretty rapidly, especially in this competitive and changing environment we live in now.
Yeah, and you're so right, and that's something that I feel is very, very important, and I think that comes from an organization that I spent about 15 years with. For many, many years, their feeling was you are responsible down to the project level. It really was a very entrepreneurial organization. So you could go, project managers, division presidents, they could go after contracts and projects that they saw fitting in with their particular line of business. And they were given a great amount of leeway, but they were also given a great amount of responsibility. If you want to
Yeah.
go after this, you need to make sure that you're going to manage this and that you are going to turn a profit on it. So we had a lot of small profit centers, but we also had a slogan that it was better to ask forgiveness than to ask permission. And I really thought, kind of growing up in the corporate world with that mindset, to me it was really so important to bring that point home in the book, that if you're going to be a manager, and yeah, you may be in a small company, you may be in a larger company, but you really do need to bring some of these qualities that an entrepreneur brings. You've got to be a visionary. You've got to see beyond tomorrow or the next quarter. You've got to bring some creativity into how you're going to manage and how the work of your department is going to take place. You've got to be willing to take a risk from time to time. And sometimes risk taking just means stepping aside and saying, I don't agree with that. I know we've always done it that way, but
Right.
let's try something different, because that something different may be a much better way to do, to accomplish the same end means, the same goals for the organization. So a lot of those qualities are really, really important. And as you said, we're in a much more competitive world today. And, if companies, large companies particularly, are willing to give their managers some leeway and support them in entrepreneurial thinking, they're going to get so much more than if they have a very, very rigid type of an environment. And, of course, having said that, you still need to have some checks and balances along the way. Of course, that there are going to be processes that need to be adhered to. Sometimes things like safety processes. You don't want to get too creative in some of those areas, but
Right.
there is so much that companies can allow their management staff to do or to try. Try something out. Try it on a small scale before you implement it corporate wide. Kind of work out some of the minor problems that may arise, and then take it full scale. And I think if more companies were willing to do that, you'd encourage more people to really be thinking, to be curious, to be thinking more entrepreneurially, and to be taking some more risks.
Yeah, I think that that entrepreneurial thinking and that questioning why, and
Yeah.
those deadening words, and you say them in the book. We've always done it that way, and to
Mm-hmm.
question those kind of things, and that gets into this is the last real point that I have. I think is the difference between or the complementary factors of management and leadership, and that type of
Mm-hmm.
the visionary kind of voice, and questioning why we're doing things, and then the how we're going to do it in the more pragmatic, the strategy and the tactics, and
Mm-hmm.
that they're not really separate things, leadership and management, but they're kind of two sides of the same coin in a way.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear you say that, because I remember about a year and a half ago being just in a discussion group, and somebody was just like, no, leadership is different than managing, and I was going, I kind of beg to differ, because I can see a good manager who's dealing with a lot of tactical stuff, and that was the point that she was making. I said, I can still see them being a good leader.
Right.
If and if they're willing to step out of that day-to-day role a little bit, because I think that's how people tend to think of a manager. But they've got this day-to-day stuff, and it's all very, very tactical. And I don't think that works in today's world. I think maybe 30 years ago that might have been more viable, but people can lead from any place in the organization. You don't have to have
Right.
a title to go to company leadership. And if you allow somebody to kind of be a little bit, not so much independent, but to be creative, and you're willing to listen to some new and creative ideas, that idea can take an organization into a whole different direction, and into a much more powerful and lucrative direction. And that's what leadership really is. So I think, and that's what we tried to weave into the book. It was,
Yeah.
the primary audience is probably first line managers who are in a mid-sized to large organization. But having said that, there are a lot of people that can benefit from it. And just because you're a manager, you want to start thinking about, how do I make this a better place to work? And that's what a leader does.
Right. Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Cornelia. This has been great. We've been talking with Cornelia Gamlem, and we've been talking about her book, this great book, The Manager's Answer Book: Powerful Tools to Build Trust in Teams, Manage Your Impact and Influence, and Respond to Challenges. And I really encourage you to pick it up. It's a fantastic read, and everybody can benefit from it. And Cornelia, how can people best reach you? And I'll put in the contact notes. You can send me some links to your website and to the book links where they're available and things. And but if you have any places that you are on social media or something you'd like to say, or
we are on Twitter. Our Twitter address is at Big Book of HR. We started branding ourselves that way, and that's where our biggest following is.
Excellent.
I'm on LinkedIn, and that's a good way to get a hold of me, because that is where our most of our audience has been. We also put out a weekly blog called Making People Matter, and you can find it at makingpeoplematter.blogspot.com. And we've been talking a lot about this book recently in our blogs and providing hints, but the blog is really focused on leadership and management issues. And those are probably, you can also get to our website, www.bigbookofhr.com. You can reach out to us that way as well.
Fantastic. Well, I really appreciate it. This has been just so much fun and just really interesting things to talk about. Do you have any parting comments? Anything you'd like to say, or that I didn't we didn't cover? Or?
No, I think we covered a lot of territory, John, and it's been great. I've really appreciated this, but just to all of you out there who are managers, it can be very daunting at times. So we hope you take advantage of a lot of the resources that are out there, including our book. And best of luck in your day-to-day management of people and processes within your organization.
Excellent. Yeah, because it's a hard job. It's really difficult.
It is.
Well, Cornelia, thanks so much again, and really appreciate it, and talk to you soon.
Okay, take care, John. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Cornelia. Bye.
Bye-bye.